So some cases might help us understand this a bit better. Panorama Developments and Fidelis Furnishings involve someone who was a company secretary. This Mr. Bain was a company secretary for a company called Fidelis Furnishings. Now he goes to a car hire company named Panorama Developments. Okay, so in this case, what you have is this person B goes to this company, Panorama Developments. And what he does is he hires cars. Okay, now he's the company secretary for Fidelis. Okay, so he's the company secretary for the company F. He goes to this other company and he hires some cars. He hires Rolls Royces, Jaguars, but he was hiring them for personal use. Okay, so he was doing it so he could go tooling around on the weekend in these cars. So the company, of course, didn't authorize him to do this and didn't want him to do it. Now, he gets convicted and he actually goes to jail. But the problem is, right, what should happen to the money? Should this company get the money for the cars that were hired? Should this company have to pay this one for the cars that are hired? Or should this company lose out on the money? Because it gave the cars to be hired out, right? It provided, it's part of the bargain, okay? So this is what we're talking about. B, Mr. Bain has done something wrong, but either the company, Fidelis, or the company, Panorama Developments, is going to lose the money. The money's lost. Who's going to lose it? The third party or the principal? And this is where apparent authority comes. In this case, the courts held that Bain had apparent authority. First, Bain was the company secretary for Fidelis, and Panorama Developments didn't know that Bain didn't have authority to hire the cars. Second, Fidelis had appointed Bain as the company secretary. They'd done something to make Panorama Developments think he had authority. You know, that's a pretty senior position, and you would expect that the person in that position could hire cars, right? So a reasonable person would expect the company secretary could enter contracts like this, okay? Third, Panorama Developments relied on that, right? They relied on his role as a company secretary to execute the contracts, to give the cars to him. They said, of course we're going to believe a company secretary. Here's the cars. So what you have in this case is all three elements were held out. Panorama Developments did not know Bain didn't have authority. Second, Fidelis Furnishings had held Bain out to be able to enter the contracts by making him company secretary. Third, Panorama Developments relied on that. They relied on him being company secretary. That's why they signed the contracts, because they thought it's reasonable a company secretary can sign these contracts. So therefore, who lost the money? Fidelis, right? They had to pay the money to the car hire company. And that kind of makes sense, right? Because Bain was their employee. Right? So if anyone's going to lose, shouldn't it be the people who employed the dodgy person rather than the person who didn't know anything really about him other than he was their company secretary? So it kind of makes sense if you think about it that way. How about we do one more case, Summers and Solomon. Okay, so what we have here is Solomon owns a jewelry store, right? And he employs his nephew, okay, who acts then as his agent in the store. So what happens is the nephew has been ordering jewelry from a supplier. So he goes to this supplier, who is Summers, of course. Okay, so the nephew orders jewelry. And then what the nephew does is he orders this jewelry, the jewelry comes in, and then the nephew takes off. He absconds with the jewelry. Okay, so now we've got a problem, right? We've got this jewelry store owner who didn't actually authorize this purchase of jewelry. So there was no authority to purchase this jewelry. We got the supplier who's lost the jewelry, and the nephew's taken off, so we can't get the jewelry back. So again, we got a problem. Is the jewelry store owner going to lose the money, or is the supplier going to lose the money? Okay, so let's go back a step and we've got to go through these three elements of apparent authority to answer this question. Did Summers not know the nephew did not have authority? Well, there was no way that Summers knew whether or not the nephew had authority. The nephew was working in the store, looked like they would have had authority. So the supplier didn't know the nephew did not have authority. The second element, did Solomon represent the nephew could order jewelry? Yes, right? He'd actually done that in the past. So this new order, from a supplier's perspective, looked normal. Okay, so that becomes important, right? Because he'd ordered it in the past, he thought, yeah, well, he can order it again. So he had done something. He had let him order. So he had held his nephew out as having authority. So did Summers rely on that? Yes, he never would have delivered jewelry if he hadn't have thought that the nephew was able to order it. So all three elements were satisfied. Okay. Summers did not know that the nephew didn't have authority, number one. Number two, Solomon had held his nephew out by allowing him to order in the past. Three, it was reasonable for Summers to actually, the supplier, to rely on that representation in the particular case where he ordered it later. Okay, so again, the jewelry store owner has to pay the money. And again, that kind of makes sense, right? The jewelry store owner is the one who'd employed the dodgy nephew. If anyone's going to lose money, it probably should be them. The final area for authority is authority by ratification. What that means is that the agent didn't have authority, right? The principal, when they later learn what the agent did, can authorize it retrospectively. As long as the principal ratifies the agent's act within a reasonable time, it will be as if they had actual authority at the time. So it's authorizing the authority after the event has occurred. And our case for that is Bolton Partners and Lambert. Okay, that's scope of authority. It's a critical part of agency law. We've now just got to do some other areas of law, like the agent's duties and rights. So that'll be in the next video.